Welcome to Sunday London Study Abroad Sessions, the podcast where we explore how universities, students, and employers are connecting classrooms theory in real-world experience. I'm your host, Maciek Kucha, and today we are stepping in the future of work, learning with a guest who knows all about tech, environment, and becoming a doctor. So joining us is Dr. Chris Knight. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Thanks for having me. I'm still getting used to being called doctor, to be honest.
Well, yes. So Chris has recently become a doctor. His research was into things which most of us probably don't understand. So I won't get too much detail into it. But what we're going to do is get into some questions. So, Chris, bridging theory and practice. Your journey blends everything from academic research to real-world innovation. You're taking your PhD work in weather and crop predictions and applying in a global tech company that tracks every field in the world. How well do you think universities are preparing researchers and graduates to turn their ideas into commercial, viable, scalable products?
Well, I think if you're viewing the totality of it, not very good. But then what I would argue, it's not really their job to anyway. For instance, when you do a PhD or research, your impact is measured. And, for instance, we do a study in the University of Cranfield where I did mine. I really enjoyed it because half of the reviews that we did were discussions around the impact. So we can discuss, these are the academic outputs we had, these are the academic results we've had. The impact is the question on so what? Great.
Yeah.
So impact is the so what? And it's not really the aim to make it commercially successful, but it needs to extend knowledge and it needs to increase our capability. And that's what they mean by impact. So what can we do better than we could before you did whatever you did? But that isn't attached to any commercial success. So that's where I say it's not great at turning out entrepreneurs, but then that's not their aim and it's not their objective. So it's a bit unfair to measure them that. That said, so how can we make things better? There is attempts to try and then take certain ideas and move them over to commercial success. And true PhD standard wise, it's not a top. PhDs they're not taught their research. But if you're a PhD student, they make it available to do the entrepreneurial route, but it's very much for the person to want to do it and push it that way. And I would argue that the demographic or the personality types that do PhDs aren't the ones that naturally gravitate towards entrepreneurship. And PhDs tend to be on the career ladder of getting a job in academia, which is fine and fair. So I think what needs to be done is maybe more of a taught element or some sort of intervention who comes and sort of grabs a few of the PhD researchers and go, this is commercially interesting and we're actively going to help you do it, rather than require you to want to do it and to push for it, because they might not know that that's what they want to do yet, or that they can. It's a confidence issue. In fact, one thing we're taught a lot when you're doing a PhD is there's a big mental health drive to combat imposter syndrome. And that's imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And doing what your PhD's on. Never mind to then consider going into entrepreneurship as well. If you're already struggling with imposter syndrome in your bubble, the imposter syndrome to go into entrepreneur is even different. So I think there needs to be an external body, an external process to look at theses coming through and then try and actively intervene and actively try and push for ideas to become businesses.
Thank you. I mean, it's all about standing in the crowd, and graduate markets is very saturated. So, you yourself build a number of ventures, tech ventures, enterprises from SaaS to Agri-Tech. So when you hire people, engineers, data scientists or whatnot, what do to make them stand out for you? Does the international, maybe cross-disciplinary experience makes a meaningful difference in innovation, like industry like yours?
I think when we hire, for technical roles specifically, when we're hiring graduates or juniors, that kind of level, we're not so much testing for what they know. It's more their attitude, to be honest with you. Because if you're a junior, if you not to be insulting, but you're applying for a junior because you're at the beginning part of your career, right? Therefore, you can't really expect them to know too much. So there's very little to gain from testing them that way. For me, if you've got the right mentality and you come across like, I would do this for free, Not that we ever asked them to do it for free, but you know what I mean? If you've got
Yeah.
that attitude of, this is what I want to do, and it would be nice to make money out of it, then they're very easy people to hire. In software development, that's quite easy because a lot of people do. So you can go on and see their GitHub account, or you can see their Stack Overflow account and all those kind of things to see what they're doing beyond what they have to do in their courses and whatnot. And if that comes across well, then you're back. And it's not just software tech. Anyone who's passionate about their subject will just naturally become great at it. Whether or not they're great at that moment in a junior role is not important. It's whether or not they can and will be great, and how much effort do I have to put into them to get them there.
That's great because, you've many a time I went to company visits with you, and you do tend to say about a lot of things about how, your own projects matter for you as an employer. So, career outcomes and employability pressure is there. So, many students studying STEMs or data science feel pressure to go straight into corporate roles. So you just brought up an interesting thing about, show me your work, show me what else have you done. So what do you think universities could do better to prepare them for more entrepreneurial or research-led innovation path like yours?
See, I'll get into discussion whether it is the university's job. I mean, again, okay, if you're doing undergraduates and masters are taught, right? So the graduation is, you go to high school, you get dragged along, right? You get given your homework, you get given your dates, and you're watched every minute of every day and pushed along. Bachelors and undergraduates and masters are a little bit different, but you're still being taught. But
Yes.
you're not being you're being taught, but you're not being pushed. And then finally, PhDs, it's research. So see you next year.
Yes.
So hopefully next year you've progressed and you can convince us that you're going somewhere. So I think if you're doing school or masters, the issue is you're very much used to being pushed.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes across when you're interviewing a lot. And that's why I think personal projects are always really interesting, because when we hire, we're a small company. It's different. It's what small companies are interested in. Is I'm hiring because I don't have enough hours in the day to do what needs to be done. So I'm hiring someone to make sure stuff gets done. And I don't have time to sit and drag someone along with it, because I'm hiring you to save me time. And if I'm having to push you along, I'm not saving time. I might as well do it myself.
Yes.
That's why the personal projects are great, because it shows your capability, it shows your passion, but also tells me that I'm not, of course I'm going to give them time. Of course I'm going to help them along. That is part of the role, but I can't do that all day, every day. And is it the university's job to do, though? I don't think it is. If you're doing a degree or bachelor's, it's their job to teach you. It's their job to get you through the course. If you're a PhD, then again, they'll hold you and they'll make sure that you're ready to submit your thesis and then defend it. That's their job. I think for PhDs, although mine's is slightly different, I would be more interested in who's funding the PhD. I think who's funding the PhD, it's more, I'm hoping that they would fund it because there's a job at the end of it, or because they're funding it because there's interest in it. So I would say, whilst it's not their job or responsibility because they're funding it, that should be enough. It's really, if I was funding a PhD, I'd be funding it in terms of, this is your training to do the job. So I would put it on myself, the funder, to make sure, rather than university. I'd be upset if the person wasn't preparing well to pass their PhD for university. That's their job. And of course, there's an element of its university's role to make sure that they're turning out useful things. But then I think that that's catered for by making sure there's impact on what they're researching and impact on what they're doing, rather than necessarily making them ready for a job. If you're doing impactful work, it should, from a university's perspective, lead nicely to industry.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all about partnerships, right? So you've just noted something about, finding the right partner. Partners, for instance, in your case, your funding, your research was funded by UK government, correct?
Well, UKRI, so mine was a little bit different, but there's lots of industry-funded PhDs as well. So I think I was leaning more on them. UKRI, Centre, really, they made available, here's my point. I'm really grateful, and they did a really great job. But if we're talking about improving, they make courses available, for instance. So if you want to do business course, they make it available. But as I said, I think the gap is the people who could and probably should do it probably don't know it at that point, or they don't have the personality types to push themselves forward in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So they're missing out on a lot of people because they're suffering with imposter syndrome in their own studies, never mind jumping into entrepreneurship as well. So I think there needs to be a bit more of a push and a bit more of a draw into it, rather than just saying, here's a course if you want to do entrepreneurship. I don't know the staff or even if there is one, but I'd be interested to know how many successful entrepreneurs knew they were going to be so in their early 20s.
Yeah, there's that. You could design a program and tiny partnerships. Agribot, your company you founded, your research is based around the work you've done for Agribot in every field in the world. You rely on a global collaboration because, of course, that work takes you to every farm field across the globe, right? So if it was up to you, say, design a partnership between a university and business like yours, imagine it, put yourself in that position.
Yeah,
What would it look like?
at the risk of patting ourselves on the back here and breaking my arm doing so, I think the stuff that we do in these events is really important. Like I said, it's not maybe necessarily the university's job to teach it, but it's maybe the university's job to make sure they're exposed to it. So maybe one way is, this is where I'm risking patting myself, but inspiring. Maybe it's people like entrepreneurs' job to inspire. It's not for me to tell them or to do it that they should do it. Maybe it's to show that they can do it. Because if you're doing a PhD, you're doing masters or undergraduates, you're obviously smart. There's no problem about that. So then the reason they don't do it is probably one, either interest, or two, confidence. And just showing someone, telling someone, like, look, I was in my 20s. I was of the mindset I was going to get doing this to get a good job and do my best to keep that good job and possibly move up through the ranks. I don't think in my early 20s I ever thought I was ever going to. I think I was pretty much against the idea, to be honest with you. But through some twists and turns of my own life, I think I told enough of my bosses that they were doing rubbish that I kind of had to do it in the end, to be honest.
Well, yeah, if it was your mindset, right, it's in your early 20s as well. I suppose not all students are the same, and you grow into that. It's in a way, the mindsets, because you did mention that kind of mindsets and attitude people have, right? It's sort of that determines also if you're going to be employing them or not. But it would be great if you could partner and design a specific program that could help universities be more engaged, especially in the fields you're in, which is around food security and sustainability, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's needed a lot. I mean, one of the reasons I got into agriculture or the foods, I don't know, right, agri-food, I suppose, is a better one
Mm-hmm.
for me, is because I'm a software guy at the end of the day, really. I grew up in semi-rural Scotland. You know, I, I did it because it felt impactful. But there was also lots of gaps for what we do as well. So there was a bit of sitting down and thinking, well, this is what I want to do. This is what's impactful for me. What sectors are good for it? And then hopefully lots of people choose agri-food or agriculture in the future.
Yes, because it's something you'd said. I remember talking with you before when you said that, this is not something you went into, like when you finish your education, you just something you went into gradually, right? This is something you chose because IT and your software engineering skills can be applicable in this industry, right?
Right. And that's the thing. I think if you're focusing on tech sector, I don't think it's interesting. And I'm not sure there's too many cases where you do software for the sake of software. Software is always embedded in an industry somewhere. You're doing software to help an industry. So then it's a question of, thinking about what sector is impactful to yourself. For me, it was agriculture. I'm sure there's others, but I decided on agriculture. There's lots of, otherwise, I think the risk of I think what I learned maybe too late, well, not too late, but later than I should have, is that you have to be more proactive about what you want to do. Otherwise, you end up in a job that isn't inspiring. If you're sitting there in a job that's uninspiring, well, what did you do to not be in that job? You just sort of apply for jobs, any other job, which, you definitely do as a junior, especially these days. Like your first job is your hardest. So, of course, when you're doing your first one, then yeah, you kind of just have to take one that comes along. But I think once you've got your feet in the door and you've got a few years under you, you need to start thinking more about, well, where am I driving this? Where am I going? As opposed to being opportunistic about it. And my path ended up me longer than it. Again, another thing to me longer than it should have is to realize that my path wasn't being in employment. But then I think that's a big difference between public schools, private schools, and say government schools, is that I lucked out and went to a really good government one, but we were drummed into us getting a good job. I mean, I was good because we were told that we should be accountants, lawyers, and those kind of things. So that's good. But the difference with public and private schools is they're kind of taught more to be leaders and entrepreneurs. So they've got a slightly different, they're more amenable to it because they've been told that. Whereas we were brought up more to get a good job and keep it. And it takes longer to get over that training from that age or that indoctrination than it would have otherwise.
Have you noticed change, especially the last 5 years, post pandemic? Expectations have changed. We accelerate towards more digital adaptation, but also you've got the more flexible working hours and people are better with tech. Have you noticed these values reflecting young professionals or researchers or collaborate with you? Um, have you changed the way you work with people?
Well, this is, I think, for again, if I put my software developer's hat on, I would say the world came to us. Like we
Mm,
were working in basements, working remotely, and doing our best not to
yeah.
go into the office way before it got cool during the pandemic. So I'd say from that perspective, it came to us. That didn't really change from that perspective. From a business perspective, it changed because I think pre-pandemic, you kind of had to have a fancy office address. You kind of had to have fancy, you didn't have to, but it was looked down upon doing calls remotely, or if you didn't have bricks and mortar place to invite people around to come for a meeting and those kind of things. So you had to have the money to do all that kind of stuff. Whereas, of course, the pandemic accelerated remote working went up, so people are being more accepting if you don't have an office. So that part's got easier. I think the bit that that's become harder is for two reasons. I think they've had a double whammy. Again, it's the junior and entry level jobs. They've had the first whammy was remote working is not great for that point in your career, because when I was at that point in career, I came out, had my degree, thought I knew everything, and it didn't take long for my first employer to show me that I didn't actually know much at all. And I don't think I would have learned I don't think I would have learned it as quickly and as harshly as I would have if I was working remotely. Because you'd be sitting next to your manager or whatever, your direct report, and just occasionally they'd be looking over their shoulder, seeing what you're up to, just casually looking over, and they'd catch you doing something that's a bit weird, and that would spark the conversation. Whereas when you're remote, you don't really have that looking over their shoulder, just making sure it's not going too badly. So it's harder to learn your trade. And then the second one is, well, the AI now. AI. I'm more of a naysayer in the AI front, but what you can see is it's definitely hoovering up junior level jobs. Not in the sense that it's I don't agree with it's replacing it, but if I'm like a mid-level developer, every mid-level developer's now got their own junior AI person. Whereas before you'd have a ratio, now it's every mid and senior has their own dedicated junior that they put time and effort into, and that's the AI models.
Do you think this shift is permanent, or this is just something that a lot of the sort of so-called AI bubble is part of it, in which people realize we have to step back a bit because we replace too many jobs?
No, I don't think we're going back. I don't think, if you're talking about AI in general, I don't think we're going much further, much quicker. I think we're going to see a plateau for a while. In terms of, I don't think AI is going to get any better, any quicker from this point. And now, if you're a developer and you're not using AI, you're not. 5 years ago, if you're a good developer, is quality code quickly, right? That's what you want. If you're a developer these days, and I think it's true for lots of jobs now as well, to be honest with you, is if you're really good and quick at your job, but don't use AI, you're not going to be as quick and as good as someone who is equivalent to you, but now uses AI. So I think AI is a productivity multiplier that it's hard to keep up with if you're not using it.
Yeah, I mean, with an industry like yours, AI helps you with sorting out terabytes of data, I suppose, much quicker. So it's very important.
Perhaps, but I would argue it's more closer to something like yourself when you're doing campaigns or you're writing script and that kind of thing. Where AI helps developers is write code. It writes code to a mid-okay junior developer level. And it does that because code's just text at the end of the day. It might seem gibberish to some, but it is actually like a language, and this written language, AIs do learn how to do it. And that's where it helps us. So instead of me writing 1,000 lines of boilerplate code, once every 3 days, the AI can write the boilerplate code in about 10 minutes, or it take me 3 days just to type out. I'm not thinking about it. I'm just typing it out because I've done it thousands of times. So that's what it helps. And it's the same as a lot of my job, sadly, these days is writing proposals and bids and whatnot. And I use AI exactly the same doing that as I do writing code. And I wouldn't be able to get as many applications out as I do without AI. So it's not replaced anyone, but it's just making me more productive. And I think It gives me I might be tempted to write a junior writer, for instance, if I didn't have the AI models.
It's interesting because it sort of links to the previous question I asked you about, standing out in that sort of very saturated market, especially graduate market. We are trying to find the ways to bridge the gaps between the industries and, be ahead of the curve, because you have to know by the time you graduate, you build a global tech company. The return on investment could be many. So what would you study? AI, these things, work placement, your own projects, but, perhaps also, the fact that post-pandemic, as you said, the shift may be permanent, more flexible, but also soft skills are important, as you said. What do you think is the real return on investment studying, maybe working abroad? Because, we do have many audiences international, and they bring in different traits, different skills, because they've been exposed to different geographies and ecosystems. Maybe the shape they think, how exposure can, in from different places across the world, and ways of thinking perhaps can shape better scientists, innovator, in your opinion.
I think that's maybe to become a little bit controversial. I think that was the whole initial aspect of diversity. It wasn't so much, for me, the diversity that was always the one is the diversity of thinking. Beyond everything, that is different perspectives, different ways of looking at something. For me, that's where the real value is. So I think going abroad, I mean, I lived in China for quite a while. After I finished university, I went to China. I went to China specifically because it was just a different world to what I was used to. And that's what I wanted. Of course, I wanted to have fun and I wanted to have a good time, but ultimately, in the day, I wanted to challenge myself and challenge how I think, and all the preconceptions that you don't realize you have. I wanted to challenge those, so I went complete. This was pre-Olympics China as well, so and rural China, and that's what I wanted. I wanted more diversity in my own thinking. So I think the benefits are difficult because they're intangible ones, but they come through in terms of, well, you can think your way around problems better. And the soft skills is you become more empathetic because, obviously in China, they live very differently and they have different life experiences to us. You go across there and I always viewed it as I have to adapt to their ways of life. I can't turn up there and ask them to do what I do. It's just not on. So you really have to live a life in someone else's shoes for a while, which really focuses your mind on how to do that. And, when you start a business, it's to accept that I have my way of thinking. Right? When we hire, one, it's to save me time or to boost the company's productive hours, I suppose, rather than being about me. But it's also to introduce, blind spots that I have just naturally. Going abroad for a lot longer might not even fill those gaps, but it definitely highlights the ones that you have. And it's not really for me to fit. You don't necessarily have to fill them, just be aware of them and then hire people that fill that and other people will fill it for me. And that, for me, that's a great team. So we tend to hire people that fill a gap, whether it's skill wise or philosophically or perception wise as well.
This is something, I meant to ask you earlier also, do you sort of change the way you lead your teams as well? Since this is more digital, less, in work, but working from home, have you changed your structure, how you lead teams at all in any way?
I don't think there's a change in philosophy, but I think I tend to lead from the front. So I tend to charge ahead and try and, well, that's my, because I'm a tech co-founder, I'm a founder, but I'm a developer as well. So I don't really have to rely on the tech team too much. In some ways I'm dragging, oh, that's not quite true. I lead from the front and I drag along and I just march along and try and get everyone to come along with me. And I try and inspire from that way. Where that's hard in a post-pandemic world is that's harder because occasionally I have to make sure that everyone is coming along in the same direction with me. When everyone's in the office, again, it's just easier because you're constantly having conversations with people. You're seeing what they're up to, not in a weird way, just as in you just naturally, because you're in the same space, you just pick up on signals that you wouldn't otherwise. So I have to consciously, and I'm not great at it, but to make sure I take the time to purposely catch up with someone and see what they're doing and see what they're up to. Things I have to micromanage more than I used to, but then that's because if we just don't talk for, say, a month, they've probably gone in a completely different direction than what I thought we had discussed and what I thought I had made clear. But turns out I didn't make it clear and I didn't actually discuss it sometimes. So I think I have to be conscious more about engineering interactions as opposed to letting them happen naturally.
That was great. Thank you for your insights. But I have a final question. This is something we always ask our guests, and this is, do you have a question for our next guest? And our next guest is from university.
Do I get anything more than that? Or
No, you can ask a question, any questions you like. You could be a member of a teaching staff. It could be a researcher. It could be a faculty leader. Imagine our next guest is a professor from university, perhaps in STEM. There we go. Our next guest is someone from STEM university. What would you ask?
well, if they have PhD students, I would ask them what is the impact that they're most excited from their current PhD students.
This was interview with Chris Knight, showing us how deep research can scale into a global impact. So thank you for answering all our challenges thoroughly. I was our host, Maciek, and I'm going to see you next time on our Study Abroad session from Insider London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.